Hello and welcome to this tutorial. Today I will show you how you can make this Vortex geometry nodes effect. First of all, you want to delete everything and you want to bring in a plane. It doesn't really matter, you could have used the cube as well, but I use a plane. And you want to rename this by hitting F2. I'm going to call it Geo for GeoNodes. And then you hit over to the geometry node section and you click new. Since we want to create a vortex, the base of everything, it's gonna be the spiral node, which you can find if you just search for spiral. And you want to cut the connection from the group input and you want to plug in your curve into the group output. So now you can see that this node is basically providing us with everything we need. We have the start radius, we have the end radius, and we can also control the resolution, rotation and height. So I'm going to put this to 7 meters and I will play with the rotation as well. So I will put the rotation to 5 and I also will bring in the start radius a little bit and make the end radius a little bit like wider in a sense. Okay, cool. I want to distribute some points along the curve. So in order to do this, I have to first convert this curve into a mesh. So let's search for the curve to mesh node, which is doing exactly what I want. It will use whatever you plug in here to then create the mesh. So I will search for curve circle node. As you can see, this is a little bit too thick. So you can play around with the radius, bring it down so the tubes are just touching each other. Something like this. Doesn't have to be perfect, but you know, something like this. We need to distribute some points on the faces. So to search for the distribute points on faces node. And that's where you can play around with the number of points in your scene. Just put this to like 30. And now we want to move the points along the curve. In order to achieve that, we need the information of the spiral to then move the curves in a similar way, kind of. If you want an information of a curve, you usually use, in this case, I guess, you use the sample curve node, and you can just plug in your spiral into the curve's input. And now you can see I can gather the information of the value, position, tangent, and normal. And if I plug in a set position node between the distribute points on faces and the group output, you will see, and if I combine the sample curve position with the set position, we will end up with one position for every point. So basically all the points have the same position right now. So that's why it seems like we only have one point, but we have plenty of them. But they are all in the same position, so that's why it seems like it, right? And we can break this up by playing around with the factor, which is kind of like moving the point along the curve. And if we plug in a random value into the factor, you can see that it's giving every point its own position. So now we can actually see all of them, but they are still too uniform. It looks a little bit boring. In order to make this a little bit more interesting, we can use a noise texture to break this up. So bring in a noise texture, plug the color into the offset. Now you can see that we have some more variation, but the problem is that our vortex is moving away from the origin, and the reason is that the noise texture has a value from 0 to 1, and the average value of that range is 0.5. So by average, our vortex gets moved 0.5 from the origin. So that's why we have to subtract 0.5 here with a vector math node. in order to get our vortex back to the origin and kind of undo the movement. We are fine, and we have the distortion from the noise texture, but our vortex is still in the right position. Great, cool, okay. Now, if you want some more distortion, take your subtract node, duplicate it, plug it in, and set it to multiply. And if you amp up this value, you can see that we have some more action, kind of. If you want the points to move along the curve, you just bring in a math node. You plug it between the random value and your sample curve. Bring in a scene time node. You have like two outputs here, seconds and frame. And it's outputting like the seconds in your scene or the frames, depending on what you want. So I will use the seconds, and I will use this to drive our motion. And you can see it works, but they all stop at the top, which is not what we want. So basically how we can fix this is we can just duplicate the math node and put it to fraction. Let me explain what the fraction node does. So basically it will give you the fraction of a number, right? So let's say you have the number 1.5. The fraction of that number is 0.5. It's not a whole number. So if we have a number like 2.7, the fraction of that is 0.7. So it will give you just that number. The fraction node will just go up to, like from 0, will go up to 1 and then jump back to 0. If you want to make this slower, like if this is too much movement for you, you can just duplicate your add node and put it between the scene time node and the add node, and put this to divide, put the value to something like 10 or something. And now you can see we have a really nice constant flow. We now want to instance something on the points. Instance on points. There we go. I'm going to use the echosphere for that. But you can get creative, you can do whatever you want. I will put down the radius, that's fine for now. So here's the thing. As you can see, they all have the same scale, which is kind of boring. And if you want to break this up a little bit and give this some more variation, you can do the following. You can use a geometry proximity node to scale them depending on their position in space. You just bring in a geometry proximity node. Basically, you want to duplicate whatever you used for the instancing, and you want to introduce a join geometry node at the end, and you want to plug in your echosphere, okay, so you can see it. And now you make this really big, like this. And after your echosphere, you just use a transform geometry node to move it up, like this. So now you can see we have the echosphere on top and then the vortex below. So now we basically, if we plug this in, we can calculate the distance between our vortex and our echosphere with this setup. Like that's what the geometry proximity node is doing. That's why it says a distance here as well. So you can take this and you can put it into the scale. And now you can see that basically now everything that is far away will be bigger, and the closer the echosphere gets, like the instances get, they shrink down, right? What I want is actually flipping it around, like it should be the other way. They should grow when they get closer to the top, so we can use a map range node for that. If you don't know what the map range node does, it's kind of like a color ramp in a way. So if you have a color ramp, you have those like handles, and also you can play around with the value, like the brightness, kind of like the handle position is equal to this, like the top two values. So if I play around with this number, it's kind of like moving this handle. And if I play around with those two, it's kind of like changing the value or the color of the handles. Since I want the effect to be like backwards, like to make them grow, I'm gonna flip the top two numbers. So I'm gonna put 1 in the minimum and 0 in the maximum, and I will bring this up to be like maybe like 5, and you can see right away it's basically doing what I want. And now I'm just have to play with the bottom two numbers to dial this in a little bit. They should be really small at the beginning, but then really big at the end. So I'm gonna make it like this, something like that. If you don't like the position, you once again have to play around with the from min again. This is fine for now. So this is our vortex now. This is how it looks. Actually, let me dial this in a little bit more. Something like this works. They all have the same rotation, which is also kind of boring. And you can break this up by introducing a rotate instance node. And we want to rotate them depending on their index. Okay, I'm gonna explain what I mean by that. If you just search for index and you plug it into the rotation, you can see they all have a different rotation now. If you don't know what an indice or index is, basically if you take a look at the instances in our spreadsheet, you can see here are like some numbers, and this is basically like the number of your instance. So it starts at 0 and then it goes up like 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's the index, like the number of your instance. It's kind of like a name tag in a way. I mean, a name tag if you work at a really bad company, but you know what I mean. They all have their own number, and we can say, okay, rotate them depending on this number. So Blender is giving this node a different value for every single instance because they all have a different number here. Cool. Okay, if you want the equispheres to move, like right now they only just move along the curve, but I want them to have like an independent movement as well. So I can go back to the noise texture we introduced earlier, and we can put it to 40. And then with this W slider, you can kind of like change the seed or the version of the texture, like of the noise that you use. If you drive that with a scene time node, you can get some really nice variation as well. And you can see it's really fast again, so you can just steal the divide node that you put in earlier, or like duplicate it, not steal. And if we plug that here and maybe put it to 5, you can see that we have some nice movement on every single instance. So they have some independent movement as well. So yeah, basically that's like the first version of our vortex, and I want to have at least 2. So basically I will take this whole setup and put it into a frame. I can just take everything and duplicate it and then put this in here as well. So we connect it again with the join geometry. So we have 2 versions now, and this bottom one I want to transform a little bit. So at the end, after the rotate instances, we search for transform geometry. We can move the whole vortex. We can move on the Z axis, like up or down. I'm gonna move it down, and I will just play around with the map range node. So we have like kind of like a different version of our vortex. And also I want to mess around with the noise, which is driving the movement of our points. Like the independent movement, I will put it to maybe 7. And finally, I want to change the divide node that is controlling how fast our instances are moving along the curve. I will put this to 15 maybe. So now you can see we have 2 versions of the same vortex. You can change what you want to instance here as well. So I will use not an ecosphere for this one, but maybe a cube. And you can see that for the cube, we have to change some stuff. So bring down the size maybe. Something like this maybe. So you can see now we have kind of like a nice variation between the ecospheres and the cubes. And I think now it's time to set up the camera. So if you don't have one, because we deleted everything earlier, you can just hit Shift A and bring in a camera. And if you have like the top view, if you hit Alt and drag with your middle mouse, you can hit Control, Alt and 0 on your num-block to snap the camera to your view. You can change the resolution to 1080 by 1380. I think that's Instagram dimension, I'm not sure. And you know, play around with the position of your camera. And if I now switch the render engine to cycles and put this to GPU compute and look in the render view, you can see this is what we get now. So this looks pretty cool, I think. Let's change our camera to be not like the type, to be panoramic. And you can see now we are really far away. So you go to the lens and you put this to maybe 50. So you get like the position you had earlier kind of, and just, you know, just play around till you have the whole thing in frame again. And you want to go down to the depth of field. You want to enable it and you bring down the f-stop. And here at ratio, you bring this up to be 100. So now you have that swirly depth of field, whatever you want to call it. And now you can play around with the depth. Basically, you want the end to be out of focus. So you have this like nice spiral at the end. Bring in some area lights like this. Amp up the power to be 100 and just rotate them like this. I mean, yeah, this is like the point where you can do your own thing. I will make a really basic material for the versions as well. So we are back in the geometry nodes setup, and I just put 2 set material nodes at the end for each version. And if we now head to the material tab, we can create 2 materials, and you want to call it like mat 1 maybe, also mat 2. And now we can select them here, because you can select in geometry nodes, you can't just select from the material tab directly. You have to use this node to do that. And yeah, so now you just play around with your lights and your materials. So I will go to shader editor and I will make this really basic, just to give you an example. So I'll make this maybe like violet, like the ecospheres. Bring up the metallic factor and also the roughness. Put it down, and I will do a similar thing to the cubes, so maybe make them like bluish and bring down the roughness, bring up the metallic. And if I now look through the camera, you can see this is kind of the look that we get. It's still pretty boring because we don't have good lighting yet. Play around, you know, duplicate the lights, bring them up. Look through your camera to see how it looks. You can also make the second, like if you have a window here, you can just put it to be a 3D viewport and go into your camera, put it to render view, and you can just play around in your solid view here, and you can directly see how it looks. Also, you can hit Control B in this window and just drag over your render view to make sure that you only see the middle part, which is really helpful if you want to, you know, really just work on the look you have in the final render. So this is my final setup and I want to walk you through it. So basically I have, let me disable that. I have like two lights from each side with a strength of 2000. and then like a really big one at the bottom. And finally, what I did, I added in a cube, and I just gave it a principled volume, a BSDF, which is basically, if you don't know how to do it, you create a cube and you give it a material, and then you delete the principled BSDF, and you search for principled volume, and you plug it into your volume, not the surface, the volume, and then the color to pure black, and then you can just play around with the density, so you have some moody kind of look, which can be really cool. And also I animated the camera, just, you know, so I have some movement in the scene. If you have detailed questions about the last bit, like how I achieved the look and stuff, just ask and I will answer your questions. Oh, and like one last final thing, if you want some glow, you can just go to the Compositing tab and you hit Use Nodes, and then you will see something like this. And you just search for, like, hit Shift A and just search for glare. Put it between your render layer and your like composite output, and just put this to fog glow, and then just put it down to like 0.2. That's how you can get this like glow effect on the highlights of your scene. What up, people? It's me from the future. I'm editing the video, and I discovered that I just reviewed my render and the spiral is like way too fast. So just to give you a heads up, if you just copied my settings, make sure that you slow this down because this is really fast. So let me show you how to do that. You go into your GeoNode setup, and then you basically, it's this it's this one. Yeah, it's this node, and you really just double the numbers. So this becomes 20, and down below this becomes 30, and there you go. And now you have like a, make sure that you review this in the solid view mode, so you can actually, you know, kind of see how fast this is. So you could argue this is still too fast. So I will put this to maybe 25, and the other one I will put to 35. Okay, so I hope you learned something. Leave a like if you did, and you can also, if you have questions, you can just write a comment and I will try to answer them. And I see you guys in the next tutorial. Bye.